If you're ready to unlock your potential to transform the world around you, then join us here on the Lovin Leadership podcast as we dive into the art of leadership, exploring cutting-edge strategies and timeless wisdom, empowering you to become the exceptional leader you were born to be. You'll learn from inspiring interviews with visionaries, changemakers, and thought leaders who give us practical and actionable real-life leadership strategies, and we'll celebrate authenticity and empathy because leadership is about connecting with others on a profound level. So if you're ready to transform your leadership journey, don't miss a single episode of the Lovin Leadership podcast. Subscribe today for access to a wealth of wisdom, inspiration, and actionable strategies. Let's redefine leadership and create a world where every leader leads with love, passion, and purpose. Welcome to the Lovin Leadership podcast, where we bring you interviews with extraordinary leaders who are changing the world. I'm Dr. Beth Merkel, your Lovin Leadership podcast host, and today we have a special guest. With us is Quinn Texmo, and Quinn is a business development and diversity advocacy expert with Turner Construction, headquartered in New York City. She's a leader in her industry and a fierce advocate for women in the working world. And Quinn has received numerous awards for the work that she's been doing in this field of advancing the careers of women, particularly those in male-dominated fields. But that's certainly not all there is to Quinn. She's also an expert on the topic that most of us tend to shy away from, and that topic is failure. I had the pleasure of meeting Quinn at a Heartland Women's Network meeting last year when she presented on the topic of failure. And her presentation reminded me of a professor that I had in one of my graduate programs whose favorite saying was, "Failure is not an option, people. Failure is not an option." But Quinn knows that failure is an option, and it's a necessary part of our journey toward success. So thank you so much for joining us here on the Lovin Leadership podcast, Quinn.
It's my pleasure, and it is my pleasure to talk about how not only failure is an option, it's necessary. It's also going to be one of the biggest opportunities an individual has to grow and to learn. You can't read a book and learn more than you can by failing.
Wow, those are some powerful words. But from the earliest age, we're taught that failure is something to be feared. It's something to avoid at all costs. So what if we learn to accept that failure is inevitable and it gives us the opportunity to learn and grow? Yeah, that's right. Failure can be our greatest teacher if we're willing to embrace it. So, Quinn, I have to ask you, turn it over to the expert and ask, what's your perspective on the value of failure? I think to much of our audience, it might seem that value and failure are contradictory terms, but you say that there's value in failure.
I would argue there's tremendous value in failure. The important part when it comes to failure is not looking at the failure itself. It is how the individual responds to it. So when you fail, you can take something very personally and be like, that's it. I'm a failure. I'm out. And what you're doing is you are backing yourself into an emotional corner. You can't learn anything from it. You're like, that's it. I'm a failure. You have labeled yourself. You've put that narrative into your brain. The secondary way, the better way to embrace failure is to look at it as, okay, how can I respond to this? What can I learn from it? This happened. I can't change that.
That's the worst.
It's the worst. It's the worst. You know, I do quite a bit of public speaking, and there was one time I gave a presentation in front of about 60 people, and after every presentation, there's always feedback forms, and we got the feedback on the presentation, and there were 2 people who gave me critical feedback. And I took the first option of failure, and I took it personally. I was like, that's it. I'm done. Nobody wants to hear what it is that I have to say. I'm never going to public speak again. I'm going to resign from the board of the organization that I'm part of. Here's my letter that I'm writing. Because 2 people out of 60 had a critical comment.
58 said you were great, and that just wasn't enough.
I didn't hear those. I latched on to those 2 pieces of critical feedback and interpreted that as I was a failure. I failed at that particular talk that I was giving. Mm-hmm. There was nowhere for me to go with that. Nowhere for me to go. Now, let's fast forward about 9 months. I'm sitting in my boss's office, and we're chit-chatting about like the future direction of where my department's going to go. And he gets up and he shuts the door, and I'm like, well, that's weird. He shuts the door, and sits back down and makes a comment about how the board has decided that they want to take my department in a different direction. And jokingly, I said to him, oh, so are you telling me I need to update my resume? And he looked at me and he goes, yeah.
Oh, gosh. He didn't crack a smile. Oh, no.
And I'm like, hang on, wait a minute. I was joking. I was joking when I lobbed that out to you. And he was like, yeah, we're going to combine 2 departments. So I was like, so I'm not going to have a job anymore. Okay. And there were some tears shed, and, you know, it was emotional for both him and for me. And when I left his office, I was working about 45 minutes outside of Omaha at the time. I got in my car and I was like, okay, I can do one of 2 things. I can call my mom, who is my go-to for everything. But the response for calling mom would be, we're going to set the earth on fire. And we're going to have a very emotional response to this. Or I can call my best friend and mentor. And in the 45 minutes it's going to take from me driving home, I'm going to have a plan in place on what I'm going to do. Who am I going to call? Mm-hmm. Where are some potential future job opportunities? Where do I want to take my career? I made that second call, and I talked to my mentor. And within 2 weeks, I had another job lined up. These are 2 very, like, it's a compare and a contrast story of different ways that people react to failure. Okay. When I did that public speaking event, I was like, that's it, I'm done. A lot of people, when they are faced with being cut from a job, are like, I don't know where to go from here. Mm-hmm. I had the opportunity to go emotional. If I wanted to set the world on fire, 1 phone call to mom would have done it. But I took option B, which was, okay, there's nothing that I can do about this. This is the situation as it is. Mm-hmm. Here is what I can take from it. Here's where I can go with the information that I have. And that's the important thing to wrap your brain around when it comes to failure, is if you take it personal and you back yourself into that like proverbial corner, you're not going to learn anything from it. You're not going to grow. You're just going to be miserable and dwell on the fact that you failed. Mm. If you look at the failure as, what can I learn from it? I can't change what happened. Where do I go from here? That is the failure that is going to help you grow as an individual.
So what I'm hearing you say is, when we experience failure, which we all do, I've had several already today. So
same.
But when we experience failure, one of the keys is to step back emotionally and look at it, at the situation, perhaps as objectively as possible. Quinn, that's so easy to say.
No, it's so easy to say.
But failure is personal. Mm-hmm. I did it.
Mm-hmm.
There is emotion attached to it.
There is.
What about that?
You have to, it takes a lot of self-talk. It takes a lot of coaching in the moment. This is not something you can just pull out of your pocket and be like, whoa, hang on. I'm going to separate myself from this failure that I just achieved and look at it and be like, huh. So that's not how it works.
It's so not
it's
how
not.
It works.
You know, in the story that I told you about my position being eliminated at a previous company, I cried.
Yeah.
There were tears. There were tears in the room with my boss. He handed me a box of tissues. It's okay to be emotional. But I also knew, and in that moment, what my brain kept telling me was, girl, you got a mortgage. You have bills to pay. Mm-hmm. You got to figure something out. Yeah. And sitting here and wallowing in a pool of self-pity, that is going to get you nowhere. And so I think in that moment, I was fueled more by like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I need a roof over my head.
Yeah.
I need to pay my bills. Yeah. To do that, I need a job. And so I think that was the case in that point. But it also recognized that it's hard, and it is not something you have to do alone.
Ooh, interesting.
It's not.
Talk to us more about that.
I told you that the very first call I made was to a dear friend and mentor. The key phrase is mentor there. I made a very cognizant decision to call someone who I knew would react in a level-headed manner, who would help me walk back my emotional response to it, and who would help me figure out a plan forward. You know, at that point, when you're standing at the base of a mountain and you're looking at the peak and you're like, how do I get there? It is so hard to take your eyes off the peak. And for me, that peak was, holy crap, I have to find a new job.
Yeah.
I have to find a new career path.
That's a big mountain.
What? What?
That's a big mountain.
What? I couldn't see the forest through the trees. I'm going to throw out all of the cliches here. Standing at the base of that mountain, knowing I needed to get to the top, I knew I couldn't do it alone. What I did know was that I have someone in my life who has always been there for me in a professional manner, who I could call and she'd say, we'll get you to the peak, but here's the first step you have to take. And here's the second step. And here's the third step.
So your mentor, who, you know, I think it's common knowledge, if you will, that it's important to have mentors, those people who help you grow and change in your life. So if you don't have one, it's important to find one who has your best interest at heart. But so this mentor then has that emotional distance, can look at your situation, your failure, without personalizing it, and then can share that with you and give you the space to come around to where they are.
Yes. And the thing with the mentor in a position like this, they are the ones who allow you to get to that point of objectivity.
Yeah, well said.
Yes.
That's what I was trying to say, and she just, like, one sentence.
I got you.
I went on for paragraphs.
This is how it works.
So what if the failure isn't mine? What if someone on my team screws it up badly?
Yep.
And I am feeling the effects of this failure, and I feel betrayed, and I'm hurt, and I'm mad, I'm embarrassed. Do the same principles work?
I think so, but in a different way. Like, when you fail as an individual, regardless of what anyone says to you, no one is going to make you feel worse than you already do.
Amen.
You know that you have failed. You know that you did not get across whatever finish line it was that you were working toward. When that happens in a team setting, you know, I always say a little bit of empathy goes a long way. Give a tiny bit of grace. I'm also a big fan of the concept of seek to understand, don't seek to destroy. And so, asking how statements as opposed to why. How could this have gone better? Versus, why didn't this go well? You're asking the same exact thing. But what you're doing is you are helping the person who failed, and more likely than not realizes that they did, to not get defensive. Because the ultimate goal that you want to do is get to the root cause. What caused that failure? Where did the breakdown happen? And what can we do in the future to prevent it from happening again? Now, your feelings of feeling embarrassed and like what could I have done better? There's a whole gender spiel I could go into about how women take failure on personally, whereas men push it out. Darling, that's a whole different podcast.
Whole different podcast.
Whole different podcast topic.
Yeah,
but women do tend to take in a group setting any sort of failure personally, even if they're not the ones to do the individual failure. A whole different skill set and muscle that you have to build to be able to look at it and say, okay, that didn't happen. But in that moment, when it doesn't happen, you still have the opportunity to say to yourself, am I going to react emotionally? And what is the benefit of that going to be? Or am I going to act pragmatically? And which is going to be better for the team? Now, you can go home at the end of the day and get as emotional as you want. There have been many bottles of wine consumed on my back deck in the face of teams letting you down.
Right.
If we're being honest here.
We just honest.
We are. But in that moment, coaching yourself and getting to the point to where you can take a deep breath before you react and say, am I going to react emotionally? And what is the benefit of that versus what is going to be best for this team moving forward? And if it's in a situation where you're going to have to work with these people again.
Yeah. You are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You are. Unless your job gets eliminated.
Which is a possibility. So here's what I'm hearing in between the lines is that whether it's a personal mentor or a business mentor, having somebody you can go to help you get to that emotional, I won't say neutrality, but at least getting some distance there is super helpful.
Yes.
Whether it's, whether you did the thing or somebody you work with or somebody who works for you did the thing, it can really help to disperse those negative emotions by going to somebody, a third party who you can trust to kind of help you navigate that. And then you have space for the grace and the empathy. Yeah. Turning it into a teaching moment, etc. Awesome. I love that. But are there times that my graduate professor is right? Are there times when failure is not an option? Just not an option?
Absolutely.
And how do we draw a line there? What do we do?
I look at it as failure is not an option if there's a hard and fast deadline. If there is a contractual obligation to deliver something, failure is not an option. When you have a series of people relying on you, failure is not an option. If you're a heart surgeon.
Yeah, not an option for heart surgeons.
Not so much. Not so much. Failure is not okay. This is actually probably the most important point to answer your question. The biggest time that failure is not okay is when failure happens because of your own desire to be perfect.
Ooh. Okay. That's one thing that I absolutely drive home to my students. Perfection is the enemy of learning and growth. And
productivity and getting things done. And
all the things.
Yeah, it's you. Anytime that you're working with someone who strives for perfectionism, there is always going to be something to tweak. There is always going to be something that can take a little bit more shine or a little bit of buffering, like buffing up, making it more pretty, making it better, a different way to reword something. If you've ever written anything, you can edit
a million times and then a million more.
I didn't set her up for that. But
what we're doing is piling up our failures.
Yes. And in doing so,
interesting.
What you're doing there is you are prohibiting anyone else on the team from getting to help move the project forward. So your perfectionism is holding up everyone else on the team.
But every once in a while, there are those situations, especially for our friends who work in, say, law enforcement, who work in medical fields, who work in finance. And there are certain things you cannot fail at. You've got to do it. And I, or in particular, somebody on my team screws it up. Is there a way to turn that into a success, a learning moment, or are there times when we just have to draw a hard and fast line with this?
I think a little bit of both, and that's going to be situationally dependent.
Okay.
Speaking from personal experience, because boy, anyone's ever failed, it's this one. There was a situation where my team and I say my team and I, even like, I can go back to the root cause of me putting the wrong time on the calendar. We missed a deadline to submit something. And thereby it made us ineligible to submit. In certain circumstances, in my circumstance in this case, when you don't submit, you don't have an opportunity to bring in revenue.
Ooh.
I mean, that
hurts.
Yeah. This was a no-fail. Failure is not an option situation, and yet it happened. But let me tell you what happened after this. Okay. My team and I can probably count on one hand the number of times that I've broken down into tears in the office. And that was one of them.
You know it's bad.
In 15 years, I have never missed a client deadline. And we did. And it's because I put on everyone's calendar to do it too. And it was, in fact, due at noon.
Yep.
And so at 1:15, when we went to submit, submissions were closed. We couldn't submit.
Ouch.
Yeah. Everyone involved in that took it so personally. I mean, it was the most somber day I've ever experienced in what is generally a pretty jovial office environment. And here's the key piece that I think that a lot of people need to hear, and is a skill that they need to learn. When we sat down with our boss, he didn't yell at us.
Ooh.
He didn't scold us.
Uh-huh.
He didn't say, why did this happen? Why did this happen? He said, what do we need to do to make sure this doesn't happen moving forward?
And that changes everything, doesn't it?
That changes everything. And I tell you what, we were all holding our breath expecting to just get laid into. Because we missed out on an opportunity for a pretty significant chunk of revenue.
Yeah.
And I will tell you what, not only did that garner more respect for him from everyone in my office, it was also like, okay, hang on. This is a leader. This is someone who understands that in the face of failure, yelling at me is not going to make me feel worse than I already do.
Yeah. Giving into those emotions is just not going to make it any better.
No.
It's not going to bring that revenue back.
For anybody.
Yeah.
But by sitting down and saying, where did the breakdown happen? And what steps what process can we put in place to make sure that this doesn't happen in the future? I talk about this all the time. You could call me an expert on this topic. I could not have scripted a better way for that situation to have been handled. I mean, I still hold it up as the pinnacle of this is what leadership looks like.
Yeah, such a high emotional intelligence. That's a word that's tossed around so much, but what it really is this awareness of the situation.
Yeah.
Yes, this happened. Yes, it's a hard fail. I have to draw a line. This cannot happen again. But instead of freaking out and firing and belittling and losing a whole lot of really good people, just the simple way, he said, this is not going to happen again. So how can we empower ourselves to make sure it doesn't happen again? And so we went from, expecting to be diminished for your failures to being empowered to never make that mistake again. And I bet your team never did.
No. And if we break this down, Beth, he could have acted emotionally, but instead he acted pragmatically.
Yeah.
So when you look at failure, it's not just your personal response to it. It's like to your response to personal failure. But how can you respond to it when you are witnessing failure? He did not get emotional with us. He did not raise his voice. He did not say, I'm disappointed.
So he responded to the whole situation, not just the failure itself, but to the whole situation and the whole team with the failure as part of that situation. And therefore he could respond as effectively as he did.
Yep.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. So we have made it pretty clear that embracing failure, or at least understanding that it is inevitable, it is part of the journey, right? That we can and should approach failures with as much emotional intelligence as we can bring to bear. And when we are lacking, then we bring in our mentors.
Oh, yeah.
As backup, right? Mm-hmm. So, okay, all that's well and good, but how do we actually do that? What are some practical steps that I, in my organization, as an individual, as part of the team, can take to create a culture that allows for failure and uses it as a catalyst for growth? What can I do? This sounds good.
Yeah. Well, how do you do it?
Yeah.
There's not a how-to. Like, there's not a book or a list of rules or steps that you can take. I know. No. I'm working up. Maybe I'll write. Maybe I'll write one. But there's a common misconception that you have to be a boss to be a leader.
There's a difference.
There's a difference. As an individual, as someone who was on the team that did fail, what can I do? Well, I can approach the situation as, okay, guys, sorry. This happened. I know you feel terrible. I know I feel terrible. What can we do to make sure this never happens? Which was a conversation we among our team had actually had prior to going in when our boss asked us.
So I'm hearing you say accountability.
Yeah.
I did it.
Yes.
Whoops.
Yep. Yes. Without a doubt.
Ooh, that's hard.
It's, it isn't. It isn't. If you look at it not as I'm taking blame, but rather I'm doing what is right.
I like that mindset.
Yeah.
It changes everything.
And that is a mindset.
Yeah.
It's not, I've never been one to pass blame. I will take it. I'll take the hit for the team more often than not. That's a personal thing. It's a gender thing. But it's also, as you said, an emotional intelligence thing. Read the room, understand. I'm stuck with these guys. They're my team. Mm-hmm. And I say stuck with them. I adore all of them and don't want them to go anywhere. But knowing we're going to be we're going to be in high pressure situations together again. What can I do? What can I bring to them? What are my strengths that I can bring to the table? One of my strengths is command. So I can say my expectation of you, person A, is you do X, Y, and Z, and I want it by this date. And people respond to it. It's my strength is not woo. My strength is not winning others over. It takes a hot minute with me. I'll be honest. Mm-hmm. But if your strength is woo, you can use that. Your natural strength to win others over, to get them on the same playing field as you.
This is so interesting because this is so much of what I teach in my program. I direct a master's program in organizational leadership. This is foundational to the program, throughout the entire year. And it's also how I coach and how I work all of these concepts into my consulting. So authenticity, know yourself. Mm-hmm. If you do something right, own it. If you do something wrong, own it. Transparency, being compassionate, first with self, then with others, empathy, excellent communication. Say what you mean what you say in a language that another person can work with, and use your your resources, whatever they are, to bring the team to a greater understanding of emotional intelligence. Mm-hmm. Is that reading a book? Is that getting training from someone like Quinn Texmo? But once we have a language and a framework in place, even if it's just in my department or just with me personally, my organization is never going to change. I can do it. and then I can bring my team into doing it. So it's a matter of finding out how to bring that distance between that failure and our response to that failure. And then sometimes if we have to draw that hard and fast line, you did this, it cannot go on. And sometimes even this is a deal breaker. I have to terminate you. I mean, it can be that bad. At least it's done not out of emotion and done with the ultimate in available empathy and compassion, which changes the whole situation. I know we're probably getting kind of deep into our time, but once we understand the importance of creating a culture that accepts failure, and not just wallows in it and says, we fail at everything, but truly says it's part of the process, and now we're going to maximize the opportunity that it brings. There's a difference there. But once we establish that in self and we establish that in our teams, how do we sell it to those around us? How do we sell it to the people we are leading and say, seriously, try something new because this is a safe place to fail?
There's like 9 questions in that question.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. Let me say there are like 9 things I want to address in that question. My first challenge would be, is it really a safe space?
That is such a good question.
Because I have worked in places that have told me it is, and it wasn't. And so, if you're a leader, if you're a manager, like my challenge would be, are you really ready to react to failure in a way that makes it a safe space?
Because we all love to throw around these words. It's a safe place. It's, we're emotionally intelligent and all these things. And then when the rubber hits the road, we find out that, oh boy, talk can be cheap.
Yep.
All right. So we're saying that really, if we are making the choice to embrace these concepts, live them out loud.
Yep. You're hitting on the second point I was going to make is you have to walk the walk. I, as an employee, am not going to believe that this is a safe space when I watch my manager or leaders in my company have extremely volatile and emotional reactions to things that I witness.
Yeah.
That to me doesn't say this is a safe space for me to fail and learn from it. So that's a key thing. I am a huge fan, and we mentioned it a little bit earlier. I'd like to dig just a tiny bit into this one, is that there is a huge difference between a manager and a leader.
Yeah.
There is.
Absolutely.
In any industry that I've ever worked in, what I see is that people who are really good at the job that they do get promoted to be a manager of people who are doing the job that they did. And oftentimes what we fail to do is give that manager the tools on how to manage people.
Yes, the leadership skills as we go back to not just the management, but the leadership. So now we're into psychology and human behavior and building relationships and
we're peeling an onion.
All those things.
All these layers are going to come out,
things,
and I hope that they're all future topics for this podcast because
heck yeah.
I think that it is so important, and it is so important to understand that the fundamental difference between a manager and a leader is a manager is focused on the tasks that are getting done, and a leader is focused on the people who do the task.
Right. The people-centric.
Yes, and who do you want to be, and who do you want leading your organization? Are you truly in it to build people? Then you need leaders in place of that. And leaders are going to be the one who have all of the key words that we've been talking about today. The emotional intelligence, the ability to take a deep breath, step back from a situation, set the emotion aside, and look at what can we learn from this. A manager is going to look at this task didn't get done, you didn't get over the finish line, you're all a failure, period.
Fire. Yeah.
Period.
Yeah. So you and I both do leadership consulting and training and development and these types of things, and we don't do it for free. So generally, but so I want these things in my organization, and I have to go to the decision makers and say, I want leadership development training that includes empathy and compassion and communication and all these soft skills that are really quite hard. How do I convince these decision makers to give me the resources? Basically,
the money.
Give me the money. How do I say this is a sound investment? What outcomes, what business outcomes does this type of leadership, this loving leadership, this leadership that accepts failure as part of the process and maximizes the opportunities? So all those things. So I go to the boardroom and they're like, yeah, that sounds great.
Here.
No.
How do you sell it? Okay.
Yeah.
An unintended thing that I have learned in my career is I can quantify anything.
That's a skill. That's a good skill.
I can quantify anything. The first way that I would look into selling this, if you're going to look at a cost benefit analysis, it's going to cost X amount. Here's the benefit, the Y amount. Is the Y amount more and worth spending the X amount? And how I would look at it, if you are looking at compassionate leadership and empathy and building the next future of leaders for your company and expanding your company and growing your company, the easiest way to quantify it is to tie it back to retention of employees.
Absolutely. And there's just tons of information out there that relate high leadership EQ to the bottom line of an organization. And it really does increase profits, particularly through employee motivation and through employee retention, through
engagement.
Yes, all the good things.
Yes. Yeah. And that is a huge number. When leaders, when people high up in companies start to look at the bottom line, recruiting, hiring, onboarding are three of the highest cost components, because then you're looking at this over a span of time. People aren't plug and play. You can't hire someone and plug them in and they can do the job. They're not plug and play. So it takes time. Time is money. That is how you can quantify. That's the easiest way to quantify bringing in someone to help teach your leaders how to do this. You can also go to productivity. I mean, the other thing, the engagement of your employees. You can tell, it is very clear when you walk into an office who's an engaged employee and who's a disengaged.
Oh yeah, you pick up the vibe.
You do.
In any organization you walk in,
you absolutely
just pick up the vibe.
You do.
Yeah.
And if we're going to go into like the fluffy area of feeling vibes and everything like that,
that's my world.
Why not? Because it's a thing. It just is. When you walk into an office that is full of engaged people, you can feel that energy when you walk in. And it is a place where people want to be. And it is a space where people are who people want to be around.
And people want to be in a place where they feel safe.
Yes.
And valued.
Yes.
And not yelled at.
Yes.
And not afraid to make a mistake.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, the worst thing for an employee is to live in a suspended state of terror, wondering, I'm going to fail at some point.
I have been there.
Are they going to show me the door?
It's a horrible existence.
It's the
and
worst.
I think so many of us are in that existence. So, Quinn, there is so much to talk about. I could go on for hours, days, and we have.
Yeah.
But I think in the interest of time for this episode, I'm going to say thank you so much. You've given us so much to think about, so many points to ponder and to research on our own. But before we sign off, I want to know what's going on in Quinn's world. What do you want the Lovin Leadership community to know about Quinn Texmo, and what do you have to share with us?
Well, probably the biggest thing on the horizon for me, and I don't know if I've told you this yet.
A scoop.
But I have been asked to be one of the honorary chairs for the AIM Institute's big gala coming up
And for those who don't know, the AIM Institute is?
AIM Institute is an organization that seeks to engage women and people of color into science, technology, engineering, and math.
This is a big deal.
This is
They're
a
a fantastic
big
organization.
Deal. So it's probably one of the highest honors I've ever experienced, is being asked to be one of the honorary chairs for that. Yes. So watch out for information on that. It's going to be an incredible event on September 28th. But a great place to be surrounded by leaders in very fast-moving industries. I mean, technologies, it's fast.
Yes, it is.
And so that'll be an incredible room to be in. But on a personal level, I'm leaving for vacation in 2 weeks, and so have been trying to keep the calendar clear because I'm already in vacation mindset. so that's not good. But we'll be back and fully ready to hit the ground running about mid-June.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Quinn, you do public speaking on so many leadership topics and on gender issues, and particularly gender issues in the workplace. You are a talented training and development consultant and just an all-around fantastic person. How can we get in touch with you? How can we follow you?
So I do have a not very active, but is there Facebook page for my public speaking and the advocacy and what I do. And it's just Quinn Texmo. If you search, it's a picture of me at a microphone. There aren't many Quinn Texmos.
I was going to say, it's a pretty awesome name and pretty unique. So absolutely look for Quinn Texmo in your social media, and we'll have information on how to get in touch with Quinn following this episode. So thank you so much, Quinn Texmo, for joining us on the Lovin Leadership podcast today. And thank you for tuning into the Lovin Leadership podcast. And I hope you all have really enjoyed this episode and that it inspires you to lead with love in all aspects of your life, because it's important to remember that love is a superpower, and leading with love transforms the world around us. It really does. So let's go out there and make a difference, one loving act at a time. Thank you so much. I'm Dr. Beth Merkel with Quinn Texmo, and I can't wait to connect with you again on the next episode of Lovin Leadership. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey we call Lovin Leadership. Now it's time for you to take action and unleash your true leadership potential. Here are 4 easy steps you can take today. Number 1, subscribe. Hit that subscribe button. Number 2, share. Share the love with your friends, colleagues, and fellow leaders. Number 3, connect to our Lovin Leadership community by clicking the link below. And finally, take the knowledge and wisdom that you've gained from this podcast and put it into action. The Lovin Leadership podcast is more than just a podcast. It's a movement. Together, let's rewrite the leadership narrative and create a world where love, passion, and purpose thrive. I can't wait to see the incredible impact you'll make as a Lovin leader. Stay tuned for our next episode, and until then, lead on with love.